She was 74, blind, and walking her usual path through Oakridge Park until a police officer stopped her, took her cane, and snapped it in two. He thought she was just another forgotten voice. But her son is a civil rights attorney, and what happened next shook the entire town. Want to know how justice found its way back? Like, share, and subscribe. We tell the stories silence tried to bury. A morning walk, a sacred routine. Evelyn Brooks had always believed there was something sacred about mornings. Not just the way the light fell gently through the leaves, or how the dew clung to the blades of grass like whispered prayers. It was deeper than that, older. For 74 years, she had learned that peace didn't come loud. It came slow, quiet, and earned. And on that particular morning, just past 6 o'clock, she reached once again for the peace that had become her ritual. Wrapped in a faded cream shawl her daughter had knit her 3 Christmases ago, Evelyn stepped onto the small front porch of her cottage in Oakridge, Alabama. The air still held the cool hush of night. Her fingers, steady and deliberate, reached for the smooth, curved handle of the cane beside the door, the same cane her late husband, Charles, had carved by hand almost 40 years earlier. The wood was chestnut, polished with care, and worn smooth by decades of faithful use. It wasn't just a tool, it was a memory, a legacy, a lifeline. Charles had made the cane after Evelyn's eyesight began to fade. Retinitis pigmentosa, the doctor had said. Back when Evelyn was in her early 40s. At first, it was a nuisance, then a shadow, then a silence. She lost her vision completely by the age of 46, but she never lost her way, not really, and certainly not with Charles at her side, guiding her through the early fear, the unspoken grief, and eventually back into the world. Now, 28 years after his death, that cane was her compass. It was the reason she could walk alone through Oakridge Park each morning, just as she'd done for more than 2 decades. The cane knew the rhythm. It tapped gently against the sidewalk, counting cracks, listening to echoes, deciphering the subtle language of space and sound. Her feet moved in time. 1, 2, 1, 2, confident, composed, free. Evelyn passed the same familiar landmarks as always. The rusted mailbox where Mrs. Dunham used to leave flowers for her late husband. The corner bench where the high school kids used to sneak out after curfew. The magnolia tree that always dropped its blossoms a few weeks too early. She moved past them all, humming softly under her breath. A gospel tune, one of Charles's favorites. But while Evelyn moved with grace, the town of Oakridge moved with discomfort. It wasn't that she was unwelcome. Exactly. It was more that her presence unsettled the narrative people like to tell themselves. Oakridge was the kind of southern town that liked its history and sepia tone soft around the edges. Sweet tea on porches. Parades in June. It didn't have room in its nostalgia for a blind black woman who walked with purpose, who never asked for help, who radiated strength without apology. So people looked, but quickly looked away. Some nodded, some mumbled hellos, but most crossed the street or turned down their music or busied themselves with phones, because Evelyn Brooks made them think, and thinking, in Oakridge, was a dangerous interruption to comfort. But Evelyn didn't walk for them. She walked for herself. Each step was a reclamation of agency, of grace, of memory. She didn't need eyes to see where she was going. She carried the map in her soul. Oakridge Park, for all its cracks and uneven bricks, had become her sanctuary. She knew the angle of the sunlight by the temperature on her cheeks. She could tell which part of the sidewalk she was on by the shape of the wind. Every whisper of breeze, every rustle of leaf, was a marker. And each morning she walked that path. It was as if Charles was walking beside her, one hand over hers, guiding her forward with the same steady love he had always given. She reached the split-rail fence that bordered the park and paused for a moment. She tilted her head slightly, listening. The early birds were just beginning their song. Somewhere nearby, a jogger's footfall struck pavement in a clean, rhythmic pulse. In the distance, she could hear the faint rattle of a coffee cart being wheeled into position. That would be Tariq. Sweet boy. Always saved her an oatmeal cookie. Even when he ran out. Evelyn smiled. She didn't need to see, to feel that life was still good. Still full. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that this morning, unlike any before it, would become the turning point in her story. That just beyond the curve of the trail. Past the rustling hedge and the old elm tree that leaned slightly left. Someone was waiting. Not a friend, not a neighbor. A man in uniform. A man with a badge and a gun and a brittle sense of power. A man who looked at Evelyn and didn't see dignity or history or strength. He saw something else. Something wrong, something to correct. But Evelyn, in that moment, knew none of it. She simply tapped forward, letting her cane guide her across the first stretch of concrete leading into the park. The morning breeze kissed her cheeks. The birds rose higher in song, and her cane, as always, carried the memory of the man who made it. The wood was warm from the sun. She didn't know this would be the last morning she walked with it intact. That within minutes. It would lie in pieces on the path. That the quiet grace she carried would be tested in the most violent, humiliating way. She didn't know that someone with authority would choose to treat her as less than human, not because of anything she said or did, but because she simply existed, peacefully, in a space they didn't believe she belonged. She didn't know. But we do. And that's why we're telling this story. Because sometimes it starts not with sirens, not with headlines, but with a cane tapping softly on a sidewalk, and a woman refusing to be small. This is how the reckoning begins. One step at a time. One witness at a time. One truth that refuses to stay silent. And it all starts here with Evelyn Brooks and the walk that became a movement. She had just passed the old elm tree when the air changed. It was the kind of shift Evelyn Brooks could feel before most could see it. The temperature didn't drop, but something in the atmosphere did, like a curtain of stillness falling between her and the rest of the world. Her cane tapped rhythmically against the edge of the trail, guiding her past a patch of uneven brick she knew by heart. She tilted her head, paused for the briefest moment, listening. Something was off. The birds, once full of morning cheer, had quieted. The breeze still moved, but the sounds around her had sharpened less soft, more alert. And then she heard it. Footsteps, not casual, not jogging, purposeful. Boots on gravel, heavy, closing in. Evelyn's shoulders squared instinctively, not from fear, but from memory. She had lived through too much to mistake that kind of gait for anything innocent. It wasn't the pace of someone out for a stroll. It was the pace of someone asserting control. Someone trying to send a message before ever opening their mouth. "Ma'am?" The word came fast, clipped, like a blade across soft fabric. It wasn't a greeting. It was an intrusion. Evelyn stopped, the cane in her hand stilled. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The presence behind her was close now, too close. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, steady as stone. Her voice was calm, polite, the kind of grace she'd had to master long ago, just walking. There was a pause, then a voice, lower this time, but with a jagged edge. "You out here alone." It wasn't a question. Not really. It was a suspicion wrapped in fake concern. "I know this park," Evelyn said. "Been walking it for over 20 years. A short, sharp laugh slipped from the man's throat, one that held no joy, only disbelief. It said more than words. "You think that matters?" She waited for him to move on, but he didn't. He stepped closer. "You should really be more careful," he said, his tone now drenched in that particular kind of menace that pretends to care. "World ain't as kind as it used to be." She raised her chin a little. "No, it's not," she replied, not with fear, but with fact. And then, before she could register what was happening, his hand reached out and closed around her cane. It was so sudden, so violent in its quietness, that, for a split second, Evelyn thought she was imagining it, but no. Her fingers felt the pressure, the pull. She gripped the handle tighter. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarm flashing across her face. "I said, let me see that." The man growled. Her fingers clung tighter to the carved wood, but she couldn't hold him off. He yanked. The cane slipped from her hands. "Stop!" she cried out. Her balance tipped. One foot wobbled. Her arms flailed slightly, searching the air for anything solid. But there was only space. The air itself seemed to recoil. And then came the sound. Crack, clean, brutal, final. The cane, Charles's cane. Her cane split in two like a snapped twig. The sound echoed off the pavement and into her bones. The silence afterward was deafening. Evelyn stood frozen, blind, and now suddenly unmoored. Her hand still outstretched in midair. Her breath caught between her throat and her chest. The broken halves hit the ground with a hollow clatter, one piece tumbling into the grass, the other lying motionless at her feet. She heard him exhale, not with remorse, with contempt. "Next time." "Ma'am," he muttered, "don't get smart." And then he turned and walked away. Just like that. She didn't hear a radio. No call-in, no ID check. No concern. He had gotten what he wanted, the last word, the final insult, and left. She stood alone on the path, under a sky too blue for something this cruel. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't collapse. Her fingers reached down, slowly, blindly, brushing the gravel until she found the splintered cane. One half was still warm from her grip. The other felt like a relic pulled from a grave. She clutched both pieces against her chest and breathed. That's when she heard them. Voices. Not his. Others. Onlookers. Witnesses. She could hear the soft shuffle of feet. A dog leash pulled taut. Coffee lids clinking together. Whispers. Gasps. Silence, the sound of discomfort taking shape. Of people seeing, but doing nothing. Not a soul came to her aid. No one spoke her name. No one challenged the man in uniform. Because that's how power works when it's wrapped in a badge. It doesn't need volume. It just needs silence. And Oakridge, that morning, gave it freely. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't scream. She did what she'd always done what Charles taught her to do when the world tried to make her feel small. She walked, one trembling step at a time. Her palms stretched out before her, sweeping the air gently. Her head held high, her dignity bruised but intact. She moved slowly past the bakery, past the bench where someone could have stood up and didn't, past the coffee cart where a young man's hands still trembled. And when she reached her front porch, she opened the door, placed the broken cane on the kitchen table like a shattered artifact, and sat beside it in silence. She wrapped it in a linen napkin, not as trash, as testimony. She didn't know that the boy from the coffee cart, Tariq, had recorded the whole thing. She didn't know he'd watched, frozen, ashamed, and afraid but brave enough to press record just before the officer opened his mouth. He didn't know it would matter. Not yet. But it would. Because that snap, sharp, sudden, unjust, wasn't just a broken cane. It was the sound of a line being crossed, and the beginning of something none of them could have predicted. It wasn't supposed to be a day that changed anything. 17-year-old Tariq Fields had just finished restocking the little sidewalk book cart outside Miss Lambert's book nook when he noticed the early morning sun breaking through the oaks like gold dust. He'd been working the Saturday morning shift for the past 6 months, $8 an hour. Free pastries from the bakery next door, and as many used paperbacks as he could carry home. Oakridge Park was always quiet at that hour. Just Evelyn Brooks on her morning walk, old Mr. Klein doing Tai Chi near the rose garden, and the occasional jogger pounding out a rhythm of breath and gravel. Tariq liked the silence. It felt clean, predictable. But that morning, something felt wrong, off. He couldn't explain it at first, just a weight in the air, like the stillness before a summer storm. And then he saw her, Miss Evelyn. He saw her before he heard the voice. The old woman he'd watched for years, always graceful, always gliding through the park like she knew every leaf by name. She was standing still, just a few steps past the elm tree, the one with the crooked branch that pointed north like a compass. Her posture was straight, but something in it felt held, braced. Then, slowly, he saw why. The cop, tall, white, square-jawed and sunburnt. Officer Remsen. Tariq didn't need to see the badge number to know. Everybody in Oakridge knew that man, even if no one said much about him. Remsen was the kind of officer who made folks shift their gaze, the kind who always had one hand on his belt and the other on your nerves. Tariq's stomach tightened. From his post near the cart, across the paved path, and beneath the coffee cart awning, he could hear snippets of their exchange. It wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. It was all too quiet. "Ma'am." Her response was calm. Something about walking. Something about knowing this park. But Tariq could feel the shift, could hear it in the tone, in the way Remsen stepped closer. Something in Tariq's chest pulled tight. He felt the phone in his pocket, heavy and still. Don't get involved. Don't draw attention. Don't make trouble. That's what his father always said. But that morning, Tariq's fingers moved before his fear could stop them. He pulled out the phone and hit record. He didn't zoom in. He didn't speak. He just held it steady, tucked low by the cart's side rail, partly shielded by a stack of books. He felt like he was doing something wrong, like he was crossing some invisible line. His hands trembled. His heart pounded so loud he swore the mic might pick it up. Then it happened. In less than a second. Remsen reached forward. Tariq saw Evelyn's body jolt, not backward, but still, tense, braced. Then the cane, Charles's cane, was wrenched from her grasp. Tariq gasped. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice lifting. He heard it, then the crack, sharp, splintering, final. He flinched. The sound bounced off the trees and lodged itself inside his skull. That wasn't just wood breaking. That was something sacred being shattered. Evelyn stood frozen, and then Remsen tossed the broken cane like it was trash. Tariq's thumb hovered over the screen. He wanted to stop recording, wanted to run over, wanted to scream, but his body wouldn't move. So he did the only thing he could do. He kept the camera rolling. Then the officer walked away like it meant nothing, like she was nothing. Tariq slowly lowered the phone. He felt sick. All around him, people were pretending not to notice. The barista behind the cart adjusted her cups and looked away. A woman walking her labradoodle slowed, then turned abruptly down another path. No one moved toward Evelyn. No one said a word. Tariq watched her kneel, slowly, painfully, and gather the broken pieces of her cane. His throat tightened. He felt like crying and screaming and hiding all at once. When she disappeared down the sidewalk, step by trembling step, something inside him clicked. He hadn't helped her, but maybe, just maybe, he could help now, back at the cart. He watched the video 3 times. Each time, the sound of the cane snapping hit him harder. He didn't know what to do, who to tell. But one thing was clear: this video wasn't staying on his phone. Not forever. That night, Tariq walked the half-mile to Evelyn Brooks's home. The sun was setting, turning the houses along Maple Avenue orange and gold. He wore his cleanest shirt and carried the phone in his back pocket like it was some kind of truth he didn't know how to carry. He knocked twice. No answer. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Evelyn stood there, calm but still. Her hands, folded in front of her, trembled just slightly. "Miss Evelyn," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My name's Tariq. I work down by the bookshop. I saw what happened." She didn't speak. I recorded it." He held out the phone. Her face didn't change. Not at first, but her eyes sightless as they were, felt like they were seeing right through him. He tapped play. Together, in the soft hush of her entryway. They listened. The footsteps, the clipped voice, her steady replies, the snap. When it ended, Tariq whispered, "I'm so sorry." She nodded. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "But it is someone's." He handed her the phone. She didn't take it. "You keep it," she said. "You already did the hardest part." Tariq swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't feel brave. He felt like a boy trying to undo a world he didn't build. But in that moment, under the soft lamplight of her porch, he realized something profound. He hadn't just recorded an assault. He had captured the moment a mask fell off, and no badge in the world could erase it. Not now. Not ever. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that sinks into the floorboards and clings to the corners like dust. Evelyn Brooks sat at her kitchen table, hands folded in her lap, her head turned slightly toward the window where soft morning light spilled across the sill. The 2 pieces of her cane, Charles's cane, rested gently in the center of the table, wrapped in the same linen napkin she'd used to cover it the day before. They lay there not as relics, but as remains, of trust, of peace, of every careful step she had taken through a world that had so often asked her to prove she belonged. The silence wasn't new. Evelyn had lived with silence since the day her vision faded completely. 28 years ago. But this silence was heavier, thicker. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else, grief. Maybe. Or weariness. Or the weight of a humiliation too old to cry about and too fresh to forget. She hadn't called anyone. Not the mayor, not the reverend, and certainly not her son, Julian Brooks. She could picture him even now, hundreds of miles away, sitting in a high-backed chair in a glass-walled office in downtown Chicago. Civil rights attorney, legal strategist, partner in one of the most respected justice firms in the country. A man who had turned his childhood in Oakridge into fuel and his mother's quiet strength into law. He had always said her footsteps taught him how to fight. And that's precisely why she didn't want to call him, because she knew exactly what would happen. Julian didn't let things go, not when it came to her, and not when it came to justice. But this wasn't something she wanted to put on his plate. He had too much already. Important work, federal cases, clients who needed his voice, people who were depending on him to change systems, not chase small-town officers with sharp tongues and sharper hands. And yet, the moment the cane had snapped, the moment she had felt it fall in two, she knew, deep down, that it would find its way to him, not by her hand, but by fate's. And fate, in this case, wore the face of a young man named Tariq. 3 states away, in a 20th floor office buzzing with phones and law clerks, Julian Brooks was just finishing a deposition review when his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. "You don't know me, but I know your mother. You need to see this. Tariq." Attached was a video file, at first. Julian's instincts told him to ignore it. He got strange messages all the time. People looking for legal advice, accusations, scams, but something about the phrasing made him pause. He opened the message, hit play. What he saw changed him. The image was shaky, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. The curve of her shoulders, the cream shawl, the way she tilted her head ever so slightly before speaking. Her voice steady and clear, answering a question with calm precision. And then, the shift, the hand reaching, the tug. And then, crack. The sound punched through the screen like a bullet through glass. Julian's mouth went dry. His stomach turned. His heart didn't just break. It roared. The screen blurred as his eyes filled. But he didn't cry. He'd trained himself too well for that. Instead, he rewound the video, played it again, and again, each time. That sound hit him harder. He didn't watch the end. He didn't need to. By the time the video finished playing a 4th time, Julian Brooks was already packing a bag. Back in Oakridge, Evelyn sat by the window, still cradling the napkin-wrapped cane. The house remained still, but the air had changed just slightly, as if it knew something was on its way. She heard the creak of the front steps, the familiar groan of the screen door hinge. Then, a key turning in the lock. "Ma," came a voice, deep, steady, so familiar it hurt. She turned her face toward it, lips trembling. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. Julian stepped into the room, the suitcase still in his hand. He didn't speak right away. He crossed to her, knelt down beside the chair, and took her hand in both of his. "Why didn't you call me?" he whispered. Because you're doing good work, she said. Because I didn't want to be the reason you stopped. He shook his head, eyes blazing with quiet fire. You are the reason I started. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then, without a word, she reached across the table and unwrapped the cane, laid the two pieces gently side by side. Julian stared at them for a long time, saying nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and full of steel. They're not going to get away with this. Evelyn sighed. I'm not interested in revenge. Baby, I just want to be seen. You will be, he said, rising to his feet. But not just by them, by everyone. That night, Julian didn't return to Chicago. Instead, he sat across from his mother, reviewing the video frame by frame, noting timestamps, watching the officer's body language, the precise moment of the assault. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started drafting statements, legal theories, witness outreach. The lawyer in him was moving fast, but the son in him was on fire. And across the kitchen table, Evelyn Brooks said nothing more. She didn't have to, because the call she didn't want to make had already been answered. And now, justice was coming home. Julian Brooks had flown into Alabama before Christmas visits, summer reunions, the occasional funeral. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't coming home as a son. He was coming as something else, as an advocate, as a witness, as a man carrying not just his mother's pain, but the weight of every ignored injustice that had sunk into the sidewalks of Oakridge for the past 70 years. He arrived just after sunrise on a Tuesday morning, wearing a navy blue suit with no tie, his briefcase in one hand and his mother's broken cane carefully tucked in the other. The humidity hit him the moment he stepped out of the terminal, thick and unrepentant, but he barely noticed. His mind was already racing. He'd watched that video a dozen times now, studied it, dissected it, memorized the officer's stance, the arc of his arm, the moment when power turned into assault under the cloudless Alabama sky. By the time Julian's rideshare pulled up to the edge of Oakridge Square, he wasn't thinking like a son anymore. He was thinking like a prosecutor. The first thing he noticed was how little the town had changed. Same brick storefronts, same hand-painted welcome sign by the gas station, same rusted fountain in the middle of the square that hadn't spouted water in over 10 years. But there was something different in the air. Not the weather, not the light, the tension. It hovered over the town like a held breath. He walked straight to the community center, an old church converted into a shared gathering space that now served as a makeshift legal office, press venue, and meeting hall, depending on who needed it. That morning, Julian needed it for all three. Inside. The chairs were empty, but the walls were already buzzing with history. Flyers for food drives, missing persons, and local elections clung to the corkboards like echoes of a town trying to remember how to care. At the front of the room stood a wooden podium, scuffed and chipped but still proud, like the elders who filled its pews on Sunday. Julian set his briefcase down beside it, opened the leather flap, and pulled out the broken cane. He didn't place it on the floor. He didn't tuck it away. He laid it on the podium, front and center, because some things were meant to be seen. That afternoon, he held a small press briefing, not with a crowd, but with presence. The local news showed up, a few concerned neighbors, the mayor's assistant, a pastor from his childhood church, and, behind them, the quiet eyes of Oakridge people who had seen too much and said too little for too long. Julian stood tall. "My name is Julian Brooks," he began, his voice steady, deliberate. Some of you know me as Evelyn's son. Some of you knew my father, Charles. But today, I'm not here as their legacy. I'm here as a civil rights attorney, and as a witness to an act of public humiliation and abuse committed by an officer of this town. He paused, letting the words sink in. No sugar, no frills. He continued, "What happened to my mother wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice, a deliberate, violent choice by someone given power by this community. And now, we're going to hold him accountable." He lifted the cane halves gently into the air, their jagged edges exposed to the cameras, to the crowd, to the conscience of the town. "This cane," he said, "was a gift from my father, a symbol of my mother's independence, her strength, her dignity. That officer didn't just break wood, he tried to break a woman's spirit. But here's what he didn't know. You don't break Evelyn Brooks. You build movements around her." The room was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of discomfort anymore. It was attention. The local paper ran the story the next morning. Julian Brooks demands accountability after officer's assault on blind elder. The headline sparked whispers in grocery aisles, murmurs in church pews, and most importantly, questions in City Hall. Who was Officer Remsen? What complaints had been made before, and why had nothing been done? Julian spent the next 48 hours meeting with community leaders, collecting affidavits, reaching out to civil rights groups, and building a legal plan that stretched far beyond just one arrest. He didn't want just punishment. He wanted prevention, structural reform, policy change, oversight that actually meant something, and everywhere he went. He carried the broken cane. People began to talk, not just about the incident, but about their own. One by one, they came forward. A teenager stopped while riding his bike home from church. A single mother followed home by a patrol car for no reason. An elderly man told to prove his address in his own front yard. They hadn't spoken before, but now, with Julian standing tall and Evelyn walking the park again, this time with a new cane. But the same dignity, Oakridge was beginning to stir. One afternoon, a reporter asked him, "What made you come back?" Julian didn't hesitate. "This isn't about coming back," he said. "This is about standing up, not just for my mother, but for everyone in this town who thought their voice didn't matter. We're done whispering. We're done waiting." He looked into the camera, fire in his eyes. "And we're not leaving." What began as a silent wound on a sidewalk had become a chorus of truth. And Julian Brooks' son, lawyer, advocate, wasn't letting up, because justice wasn't just a profession. For him, it was personal. It was late Thursday morning when Detective Nina Walters knocked on Evelyn Brooks's front door. The sky above Oakridge was thick with clouds, the kind that looked like they were holding secrets. The air was humid, close, and charged with something that felt like revelation. Evelyn, seated by her window in the same chair where she'd sat for the past 3 mornings since Julian arrived, heard the knock and turned her head slightly. "Julian," she called, calm but curious. Her son, who had been organizing papers at the kitchen counter, looked up and moved to the door. He opened it to reveal a tall black woman in her mid-40s, dressed in a simple gray blouse and slacks. Her badge, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, hung from a leather lanyard around her neck. Her eyes, warm but sharp, met his. "Julian Brooks?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm Detective Nina Walters with GBI. "I'd like to speak with Mrs. Brooks. It's about Officer Chad Remsen." Julian didn't move for a moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." Nina entered the home and paused at the sight of Evelyn. There was something about her presence so still, yet full of gravity, that made people instinctively lower their voices, as if entering a sanctuary. "Mrs. Brooks," Nina said gently, "I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances." Evelyn smiled, faint but real. "Seems like these are the only circumstances people meet me under these days." Nina took a seat across from her. "What happened to you in that park was not just wrong, it was part of a pattern. And that's why I'm here." Julian's eyes narrowed. "What pattern?" Nina opened a small leather binder and removed 3 thin case files. She laid them side by side on the table. "These are prior complaints against Officer Remsen," she said, "all within the past 2 years." Julian leaned forward. Evelyn listened intently. "The first," Nina began, "involved an elderly Hispanic man named Manuel Ortega. He was stopped for suspicious behavior while waiting outside his granddaughter's school. No weapon, no threat, just waiting. The report said he was uncooperative. He said he was told to get off the sidewalk or be detained. No footage, no witness statements." Julian clenched his jaw. "The second," Nina continued, "was a 16-year-old black girl named Kiara Thomas. Walking home from choir practice, she had her hoodie up. Officer Remsen said she fit a description, made her sit on the curb for 20 minutes while he ran her ID. No charges filed. Her mother filed a complaint. It disappeared. And the third, Julian asked, a disabled veteran, Leon Carver, white, confined to a wheelchair. He claimed Remsen aggressively questioned him outside the pharmacy, accusing him of loitering, told him he looked like trouble. Again, no video, no consequences." Evelyn let out a quiet breath. 3 times. Nina nodded. "And yours makes 4. But this time, there's a difference." She turned to Julian. "We have video. We have a witness. And we have you." Julian didn't respond at first. He looked down at the cane pieces, still resting in their linen napkin, then over to his mother, then back to Nina. "Why were these complaints buried?" he asked. His voice was low, sharp with disbelief. Nina shook her head. "Oakridge has a long tradition of looking the other way. Small-town politics. Favoritism. A police chief who doesn't like paperwork making waves. Remsen's got friends in the department. Old football buddies. Church friends. People who say things like, 'He means well,' or 'Boys will be boys.' But they're not boys," Evelyn said, her voice stronger now. "They are men with power and no consequences." Nina met her gaze and nodded. "Exactly." Julian stood and began to pace. "What happens next? I've already started reopening the other files," Nina said. "With your mother's case, and especially the video, we have grounds to launch a formal misconduct investigation. But we need to move quickly. If this stays buried too long, the town will fall back into silence." Julian turned to Evelyn. "Are you ready to testify?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, but not just for me. For Kiara. For Mr. Ortega. For that veteran. I didn't survive 74 years just to sit in silence while this keeps happening." Nina smiled. "You won't be alone." They spent the next hour outlining everything Evelyn remembered from the incident, her words. His voice, the angle of the sun, the way the cane felt when it was ripped away. Julian reviewed the timeline, matched the events to the footage Tariq had provided, and filed a formal request to preserve all surveillance footage from nearby city cameras and businesses. But it wasn't just about the paperwork anymore. It was about momentum. By that evening, Nina had confirmed that the video had already been quietly forwarded to Internal Affairs and the Civilian Oversight Committee in Birmingham. The chain of silence had a crack now, and Julian was determined to drive a wedge through it. Outside. The first drops of rain began to fall soft, slow, rhythmic. Evelyn stood by the screen door, listening. Julian joined her. "You okay?" "Ma?" She nodded. "I'm just thinking about the other three." "Yeah?" Julian said quietly. "Me too. They didn't have anyone," she added. "No cameras, no sons in suits, no detectives who cared enough to knock on their door." Julian looked out across the yard, rain now dotting the grass in dark, even circles. They do now, that night, as thunder rumbled low across Oakridge and the wind shifted through the sycamores. Something changed in the town's rhythm. The storm outside was just weather, but inside the Brooks home. A different kind of storm had been set in motion, because once patterns are revealed, they can't be unseen, and once the rot is exposed, it either gets cleaned out or it spreads. But not this time, not here, and not with Julian Brooks standing in the doorway. By the time Friday evening rolled around, word had spread through Oakridge like heat through iron. Something was happening, something different. Not gossip, not scandal, truth. And people were beginning to whisper it with a new kind of urgency. There would be a town hall meeting at St. Luke's Community Church at 6 o'clock. Not a sermon, not a potluck, a reckoning. St. Luke's had stood on the corner of Main and Juniper for 82 years. It had been through hurricanes and heartbreak, weddings and funerals, and generations of town business whispered between pews after the final amen. But that night, the old church would hold something heavier than prayer. It would hold the weight of voices long silenced, and the pressure of a community finally looking at itself in the mirror. Julian arrived early, dressed in a charcoal blazer, a white shirt open at the collar. No tie, no badge, no podium. Just the broken cane, his mother's, and a small projector already humming near the altar. Evelyn walked in on his arm, wearing a soft blue dress and carrying a new cane oak, polished. Initials carved into the handle, but Julian still carried the broken one. He laid it gently at the edge of the front table like a piece of evidence, too sacred for a courtroom. By 10 minutes past 6, the pews were full. Some faces were familiar, Miss Thelma, who ran the corner grocery since '84, Pastor Reeves, Mr. Dunlap, who used to teach history at the high school. Others were strangers, young people, old men in ball caps, teenagers with quiet eyes. Some came out of curiosity, some out of guilt, some out of something they couldn't name. Julian stepped to the front and didn't speak right away. He just looked at them, and, slowly, they began to look back. "My name," he said, "is Julian Brooks. Some of you know me. Many of you knew my parents. But I didn't come here to talk about family. I came to talk about truth." The projector clicked to life behind him, and then, without warning, the video began to play. There was no music, no introduction, just the footage Tariq had captured raw, steady, unflinching. The park, his mother, the officer, the voice, the tug, the crack. Gasps broke the stillness. Not dramatic ones, more like the kind people make when something inside them shifts. When something they've chosen not to see becomes suddenly, unmistakably real. Julian didn't look away. He watched it with them, one hand on the cane, one hand gripping the edge of the table like an anchor. When it ended, the silence was not awkward. It was awake. He spoke again, not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. What you just saw is not fiction. It's not dramatized. It's what happened to my mother right here in Oakridge, less than a week ago. He paused. And it's not the first time something like this has happened in this town. He laid out the names: Manuel Ortega, Kiara Thomas, Leon Carver. He gave them context, dates, circumstances, patterns. Then he pulled up the files Detective Walters had shared. Redacted, verified, real. 3 people before my mother, he said. 3 stories that were buried. 3 complaints that disappeared. He turned toward the crowd, scanning the pews slowly. And I want to know, who else is in here tonight? Who else has a story that never got heard? For a moment, no one moved. Then a hand went up in the back. It was shaky, hesitant, but it stayed in the air. A woman in her 60s stood, thin, with short white hair and a trembling voice. "Last summer," she said. "My grandson Trey, he was walking home from football practice." Remsen stopped him, said he looked suspicious, made him lie on the sidewalk while cars passed, never told him why. He came home dirty, crying. I told him to let it go, to stay quiet. Her voice cracked. "I shouldn't have." Another hand, a man near the left aisle. "I was at the Shell station," he said. "March of last year. Just got off work. Officer Remsen told me to move along while I was waiting for my wife to bring the debit card. Said I was loitering with intent. I didn't even know what that meant." He shrugged. Felt like a warning. More hands now. A teenage girl. A veteran in a wheelchair. A nurse. One by one. They stood not just to accuse, but to confess. That they had been wronged. That they had been silent. That the silence had become a second wound. The church filled with voices. Thick with memory and pain, and something else to relief. Because speaking it, at last, made it real. Julian didn't interrupt. He didn't direct. He just listened. And as the stories spilled forward, a thread began to weave itself through the room. Pattern. Abuse, silence, survival. Not everyone had been targeted by Remsen, but almost everyone had a story of someone being made to feel small, ignored, harassed, mocked, shoved to the edge of dignity and left to stand alone. Until now. Toward the end of the night, Julian stood again. "I want to thank each of you for your courage," he said, "for standing up, for speaking out, because what you did tonight, this is how we break the cycle." He gestured toward the broken cane. "This was never just about Wood, or my mother, or even one officer. It's about what we allow in the name of order, what we tolerate in the name of peace, and what we excuse in the name of silence." He lifted the cane in both hands, held it high. "This ends now." Applause didn't erupt. It rose, slow, steady, like a tide, not loud, but true. Evelyn, seated in the front row, stood quietly. No speech, no tears, just a gentle nod toward the crowd. And that was enough. The town of Oakridge had finally opened its mouth, and the silence, once broken, would never close again. Because once a community confronts its truth, once it chooses to see what's always been there, something powerful takes root. And from that night on, the roots of change began to grow. The Oakridge Civil Review Board had never seen a crowd like this. On the morning of the hearing, the air around City Hall buzzed with a kind of tension that didn't come from anger, it came from anticipation, the kind that fills the lungs with something electric, something long overdue. A line stretched from the front doors, around the corner, and into the square. Folding chairs had been set up outside. Someone had brought a speaker and played soft gospel music. the kind Evelyn Brooks used to hum on her morning walks. Inside. The meeting room, normally reserved for budget debates and zoning disputes, had been transformed into something else entirely, a place where power, finally, was being questioned. At the center of the room sat Officer Chad Remsen. His gray suit fit him too tightly, the collar of his shirt tugging against a jaw set like concrete. No badge today, just a pin on his lapel and a defense attorney at his side. A man who looked like he hadn't expected to be called down from Birmingham for a small-town disciplinary meeting. But Oakridge wasn't small anymore. Not after the video, not after the town hall, not after the silence had broken. Seated directly across from Remsen. Julian Brooks adjusted the microphone on the long wooden table. In front of him rested a clear evidence bag. Inside it, 2 pieces of a cane splintered, sacred and undeniable. The board consisted of 7 members, 4 men, 3 women, 1 former judge, 1 retired teacher, 1 city councilwoman. Usually, these hearings were procedural. Today, they felt like history. The chair. A stern man named Malcolm Fields tapped the gavel once. We're here to review the conduct of Officer Chad Remsen in relation to the complaint filed by Mrs. Evelyn Brooks and supported by multiple eyewitnesses and a video recording dated 6 days ago. He looked directly at Julian. Mr. Brooks, please state your relationship to the complainant. Julian nodded. Evelyn Brooks is my mother. I'm also a civil rights attorney. I've prosecuted use-of-force cases at the federal level, and I understand both what misconduct looks like and how institutions protect it. There was a shift in the room, silent, but heavy. Julian continued, I'm not here today just as a son. I'm here as a citizen of this town, and as a witness to what happens when dignity is stripped in broad daylight and no one is held accountable. He pulled the cane pieces from the bag and held them up. This cane belonged to my late father, Charles Brooks. He carved it for my mother after she lost her vision. It was more than a walking aid. It was a symbol of her independence, of her memory. And Officer Remsen broke it not by accident, but by choice, in public, without provocation, and with the confidence of a man who believed nothing would ever happen to him. He placed the broken pieces on the table. Then he played the video. Again. For the board, for the audience, for Remsen. The sound echoed in the chamber, the soft shuffle of Evelyn's feet, her voice calm, and then that brutal, unforgettable crack. A gasp escaped someone in the audience. Remsen's attorney shifted in his seat. Julian didn't blink. He let the video play through to the end, and when it was done, he said nothing for a moment, because nothing needed to be said. The truth had already spoken. The chair cleared his throat and turned to Officer Remsen. Do you deny that you are the individual in this video? Remsen's voice was tight. I don't deny it's me, sir, but I do dispute the interpretation. My client was conducting a routine safety check. Mrs. Brooks was alone and carrying an unidentifiable object. Given the circumstances, Julian leaned in. Unidentifiable. He held up one of the cane pieces. You're suggesting a trained officer couldn't recognize a white cane being used by a blind woman. The lawyer sputtered. There was no indication. Julian cut in. The indication was that she was walking with it, in broad daylight, on a familiar route, without causing harm or alarm to anyone until your client decided she was a threat. The chair raised a hand. Let's stay focused. Another board member, a retired school teacher named Laverne Ellis, spoke up. Her voice was measured but firm. We've reviewed not only this video, but 3 prior complaints against Officer Remsen, all uninvestigated, all dismissed. This pattern is no longer a coincidence. It's a warning we failed to heed. The room went still. Julian spoke again, softer this time. This town has the chance to prove that dignity matters, that cruelty has consequences, that no one, not even someone with a badge, is above accountability. He turned to Remsen. You did this in public. So now, you answer in public. The board recessed for 45 minutes. Outside, the crowd waited. Some stood. Some sat on the lawn. Others simply leaned on one another. There were no chants, no signs, just presence, a community holding its breath. When the board returned, the chair wasted no time. In light of the evidence presented, including video documentation, testimonial support, and a documented pattern of previous misconduct, the Oakridge Civil Review Board recommends the immediate suspension of Officer Chad Remsen, without pay, pending full criminal investigation by the District Attorney's Office. The room erupted not in chaos, but in cathartic release. Some wept, some clapped. Most just stood quietly, hearts pounding, finally seeing the day they never thought would come. Consequences. Julian turned toward his mother, seated in the front row. Evelyn reached out, took his hand, and gave it a squeeze. You stood tall, baby, she said, her voice warm but steady. You gave them no excuse to look away. He smiled, and for the first time in days, the weight in his chest began to ease. Remsen didn't speak as he left. He kept his eyes on the floor. His lawyer followed, red-faced and silent. Outside, as the sun began to set behind the oaks, the people of Oakridge gathered in small clusters. They didn't talk about vengeance. They talked about change, about policy, about future elections, about what else needed to be brought into the light. And somewhere in the back of that crowd, Tariq Fields stood with his phone still in his pocket, unopened now, because he didn't need to replay the video anymore. The town had seen it, and the town had chosen to act. For the first time, in a long time, cruelty met consequence, and Oakridge took its first real step toward justice. 3 weeks had passed since the town of Oakridge stood still inside that crowded municipal chamber and watched, many for the first time, as justice met consequence. The headlines had come and gone. Officer suspended after public assault on blind elder. Civil Review Board responds to public pressure. Oakridge faces its reckoning. But what remained wasn't just newsprint or memory. What remained was movement. Quiet, steady, undeniable movement like the first winds of a season changing. And on a bright Saturday morning, under the soft gold hush of early fall light, the people of Oakridge returned to the place where it had all begun, the park. Not just any stretch of lawn or trail, but Oakridge Park, the winding, tree-lined path where Evelyn Brooks had walked for over 2 decades, always alone, always with grace, always unseen by a town too busy or too careful to look. But that day, she wasn't alone, not anymore. The ceremony was simple, just like she preferred. No stage, no microphones, just a semicircle of folding chairs near the bench under the old elm tree, where, one morning, not so long ago, her life had been publicly disrupted and her dignity so violently tested. A small platform had been built by a group of local volunteers, retired veterans, high school students, church deacons, people who once might have stood at the edge of stories like Evelyn's, but now chose to stand in the center. At the front of the gathering, a newly built bench gleamed in the sunlight, carved from deep chestnut and sealed with a satin finish. It looked like it had always belonged there. A small bronze plaque was affixed to the backrest. It read, "In honor of Evelyn Brooks, for every step taken in strength, and every voice raised for justice." Evelyn stood beside it, a new cane in her hand. It wasn't store-bought. It was handcrafted by a group of local woodworkers, some of whom had never met her until after the town hall. Made from polished oak, it bore her initials E.B.'s in delicate script near the handle. It was light but strong, sturdy but smooth, just like her. She reached out with one hand and traced her fingers across the plaque, letting its raised letters speak the words her eyes could no longer read. The crowd watched in silence. Some held hands. Some wiped tears. A few simply bowed their heads. And in that moment, Oakridge wasn't a town caught in scandal. It was a town caught in transformation. Julian stood a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him, eyes on his mother. He hadn't prepared a speech. He didn't need one. The past few weeks had spoken for him. The investigation into Officer Remsen had been officially opened by the district attorney's office, now backed by sworn statements, community testimonies, and the irrefutable video Tariq had captured. Internal Affairs had launched an audit of the entire Oakridge Police Department. And perhaps most strikingly, the town had begun asking itself questions it had long avoided. Why did it take a video? Why did it take someone with a title and a suit? Why did it take this for that to finally matter? But those questions, uncomfortable as they were, had stirred something vital. People who had never attended council meetings now filled the back rows. Mothers who had taught their sons to stay quiet now stood with them at city protests. Elders who had spent decades swallowing stories of mistreatment were now writing them down, sharing them, turning them into lessons. And at the heart of it all was Evelyn Brooks. After the plaque was revealed, the crowd began to move slowly, softly giving space, forming a wide, respectful path that stretched from the edge of the park entrance to the new bench beneath the elm tree. No one said a word. No one had to. They had all come to witness a moment long overdue. Evelyn stepped forward. Her feet met the pavement with the same steady rhythm they always had 1-2. 1-2, but there was something different now. Not just the new cane, not just the cleared path. It was the way the town moved with her, no longer looking away, no longer pretending. They walked beside her in presence, in spirit, in shared conviction that silence had had its day. And its day was done. She passed by familiar landmarks, the bakery, where the owner now set aside her favorite cornbread muffin every Thursday, the footbridge someone had recently repainted in cheerful sky blue, the coffee cart, where young Tariq now served drinks with his chin just a little higher, his smile a little less nervous. And as she walked, a few people reached out, not to help her, not to guide her, but to greet her. A touch on the arm, a word of thanks, a nod of respect. She reached the bench and paused, placed her hand along the wood, sat down with poise. Julian stepped forward, voice steady but full of warmth. "My mother has always walked this park," he said, "long before headlines, long before hearings. And every step she took with grace, with memory, with strength. But for too long, those steps went unseen." He looked out at the crowd. No more. He gestured to the bench. This isn't just for her. It's for all of us. To remind us that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it starts in silence, with one act of cruelty that awakens a community, with one voice saying, "Enough," with one walk that refuses to stop. The crowd clapped not loudly, but meaningfully, a slow rising sound of affirmation. Later that afternoon, after most had gone home and the sun had started its descent behind the courthouse spire, Evelyn remained seated on the bench, Julian beside her. The cicadas had begun to sing, and the breeze danced softly through the leaves above. "You did good, baby," she said, her hand resting lightly on his. "You gave me the reason to," Julian replied. She smiled. "You know, I didn't walk that morning to start anything. I just walked because I always have." "I know," he said. "But now, the town walks with you." She nodded, quiet and content, and in that moment, surrounded by sunlight, memory, and the hush of change. The legacy was not just etched into bronze or carved into wood. It was living, breathing, walking. A reminder that justice, when it comes, often begins in silence, but it never ends there. What happened in Oakridge? Alabama wasn't just about a broken cane or a single act of cruelty. It was a mirror held up to all of us. A 74-year-old blind black woman walked the same path every morning with quiet grace and unshakable dignity. She wasn't asking for anything, only the right to exist in peace. But when Officer Remsen snapped her cane in two, what he really tried to break was her spirit. He thought no one would notice. He thought the town would stay silent. But they didn't, and neither did her son. Julian Brooks, a civil rights attorney who turned personal pain into public justice. This story reminds us that injustice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in small-town parks at 6 o'clock in the morning. It hides in plain sight, depending on silence to survive. But when that silence breaks, when one teenager records, when one mother refuses to bow, when one community stands together, everything changes. We learned that accountability is not automatic. It takes pressure. It takes presence. It takes people like you watching, sharing, speaking. In a time when trust in our systems feels fragile, let this story be a call to remain vigilant, to question what we tolerate, to challenge what we excuse. Evelyn Brooks's walk became a movement not because she shouted, but because she kept walking. And now her name is etched in bronze, not for the pain she endured, but for the strength she never abandoned. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe dignity should never be up for debate, then help us keep these voices alive. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel so we can keep telling the stories that too often go untold. We don't chase clicks, we chase truth. And we believe America is still capable of change. One story at a time. One video can reach 1,000 people. One conversation can shift a community. One act of courage can change a town. So don't scroll past this moment. Stand with Evelyn. Walk with her. Speak up for someone who can't. Because justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with people like you. And together, we walk forward,